Awesome.
John, will you be able to record?
Can we record it?
If we're a presenter, I think, because that way it'll just get saved locally for you, right?
I'm not.
Okay, I think John has started recording the session.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Okay, great. John will go through the sales slides with you initially. So I believe John is sharing the screen.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I'd had my microphone on mute, so I did say that I'd started recording. But, no, it's great for everyone to make the time to join us this morning. The way which we typically run these presentations is it's an interactive thing, and there'll be opportunities to stop us and ask questions and that sort of thing. The way it typically works is I'll run through some initial slides to give you a little bit of a background about who we are and what we do as a company. We try and keep that very brief, 10 to 15 minutes, but of course if you have any questions, let us know, and then it goes over to Peter Smith, our head of consulting, and he'll go through a functional demo of the tool. So we are recording at the moment, so if there's no questions or anyone else joining us, then I might make a start.
That sounds good. Please.
Okay, no problem. All right, I'll make a start. So I'll start off with talking a little bit about Avolution as a vendor. So probably, I know this is a big slide, but probably the key things out of the slide is leadership position in the Gartner Magic Quadrant and the Forrester Wave. We've been around for, this slide should change from 17 to 18 years. We've achieved 4.7 in the Gartner Peer Insights, a point which I'll touch on later, so that's actual architect ratings. We've reached over 100 countries, have over 2,000 companies and 3,000 certified Abacus engineers. Today we're speaking to you from Sydney. However, we also have a support office in Singapore as well. We work across all of the major industries, so finance, consumer, government, etc., etc. We support over 100 different frameworks, 30 out of the box and 70 which can be preloaded from our community. We've experienced tremendous growth, and we're Archimate and TOGAF open certified. So just a quick slide about our clients. You can see that we've got clients in many industries, and hopefully you recognize a few of the icons here. So one which I always point to is Coca-Cola, but there's also in the finance space some of the larger banks over here and abroad, so Westpac, ANZ, and then further afield, Bank of New Zealand, Barclays, etc. Just further to that slide, we've got a number of case studies which might be useful. This is something which I'll share after the presentation, and again you can see some of the logos of the clients who we have over here. Probably our largest client within our company is Nationwide over in America, and they have in excess of over 400 architects, so they're trying to really tackle some complex problems. And so that I can share a case study after the session, and we support many different frameworks within the finance space, such as BN, Accord, TOGAF, Archimate, etc. So I'll move on to what others think of us. As I said before, probably our highest accolade is our leadership position within the Gartner quadrants, the Peer Insights as well, which is what real architects and solution architects have their feedback about us over there. Within the Forester Wave, I believe this is out of date. We've actually achieved the first position over here, so I'll be sure to be changing these slides very shortly. As I said before, we're TOGAF and Archimate Open certified, and we've been rated as the #1 tool by Syricon, Pragmatic, and other independent bodies. Now, I just wanted to quickly touch on this slide, which is goes through Gartner critical capabilities analysis. So Gartner likes to rate the respective EA tools according to their capabilities as a repository, the modeling abilities of each tool, the presentation of each tool, the number of frameworks and standards, and flexibility of each tool, and importing those frameworks and standards, and the usability of each tool. So you'll see that Abacus is on the left over here, and all of our ratings along this line are there, and all of the other vendors are to the right. So something which we really try and focus on as a point of difference is the quality of our capabilities. So as I said before, something which you can access as well is the Gartner Peer Insights. So I will share a copy of these slides after the presentation, and if you go to the URL on the top right of screen, then you can see what real architects have said about us. But overall, they've rated us a 4.5, a 4.7 rather, out of 5. And I believe that there's I think it's up to 63 odd reviews. So it's some quick Gartner metrics at the bottom of the screen. 69% of users who deployed Abacus gained value out of the tool in under 3 months, and 92% derived value from the tool in less than 6. 87% of companies that considered Abacus seriously eventually ended up purchasing. So why Abacus? Abacus supports over 100 different frameworks and notations out of the box, as I mentioned earlier. So within the finance space, BN, BPMN, and there's many others over here. So ITIL for project management, TOGAF, Sarkman, etc. So I might let Peter further talk to this later on. Abacus is designed for quick wins. So it's easy to configure in a day and import and export in many different types of formats. Select a standard framework, easily adjust your meta model to analyze cost, risk, performance, reliability. So one of the things which we may go through today is the algorithms or the simulator capabilities. And then lastly, it's easy to communicate value to stakeholders. So we have a tool called Abacus Enterprise, which seeks to put Abacus at the heart of your business, in the sense of it seeks to provide a lot of the artifacts in a form which is consumable to stakeholders throughout the business from a website. And there's many other reports, tree maps, heat maps, diagrams, etc., which you can create. As I said before, the aim with Abacus is to put EA at the heart of your business, in the sense of enterprise architects should be trusted people within organizations, or our approach is to empower users, and it's very much to support architects and to support your vision in road mapping. So you can see the idea is to get information or to collaborate with various other actors, such as the CIO, and import from various different places and put the enterprise architects in the center of the organization. So we'll move on to the demo now. There is quite a few slides which I've cut out in the interest of time, but I'm happy to share them after the presentation. I think really what you want to do is you want to see the tool. So I think I'll hand over to Peter Smith now, and maybe it's a good opportunity to talk a bit more about the challenges which Cardno are facing, and then he might be able to go through some examples as well. So I'll stop sharing now, and it's over to you, Peter.
Okay. Hi, guys. So my name is Peter Smith. As John mentioned, I'm responsible for the consulting side of Abacus. So my background is that I've been in enterprise architecture space for a number of years. So I've been with Avolution probably about 5 or 6. Prior to that, I was actually a customer. So I was working in the enterprise architecture space. I was doing a lot of TOGAF training, so I'm quite familiar with that. I think you have an interest in that. So I've been working with customers to implement TOGAF, but with Abacus, working with customers to get an understanding of their current state and their future state, and to be able to implement the tool and start to drive value out of the tool, so that the customers can meet their stakeholder concerns and start to create value with the tool. So what I'm going to do is I'll just share my desktop at the moment. So hopefully you can see my screen loading up at the moment.
Loading?
Loading, yeah, but I think it takes a few seconds for the first time.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, now just before I start, now my understanding is that you're looking at getting an understanding of your current state and moving towards a target state with a CRM type project, and using a TOGAF based sort of approach. Is that correct?
Anita, is that?
Yes, we've got to, yeah, pretty much, yes.
Okay.
We're trying to map our
Okay.
current, and then we have we have a couple of projects to move us
okay.
to. Yeah.
So what sort of questions are you needing to answer with the tool? So notice there's application people and financial analysis. So is it getting an understanding of the costs? What is the main driver of the projects and the work that you're doing at the moment?
All those.
Sorry, Peter, we have a massive list.
Okay. All right. No, that's okay. All right. Look, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take you through the tool. So I'm going to go through sort of the 3 stages. So we're going to look at sort of the analysis, and then going through the understanding. So the first part's sort of how to set it up, how to get data into your model, then looking at how we do the analysis, the type of things that we can do with the tool, and finally we'll get to the communication side. So how are we going to represent this information to our stakeholders? So normally what we're doing with the architecture is that we're creating a model of the organization so that we can understand how things currently operate and how they might operate in a target state, and work out sort of what are the main things that we need to change, and work out how we're going to move from a current state to a target state. And Abacus is primarily a modeling tool, so it's important that you're able to create a representation of your organization so that you can get in there and you can analyze it and do sort of what if type scenarios and look at how you're going to get to a target state. So Abacus is really the strongest tool on the market in terms of modeling, and that's important because the environment that you work in is typically very complex. For a lot of customers have thousands of servers and hundreds or thousands of applications, and there's processors hanging off that, and there's lots of different pieces of information, capabilities that they're trying to support, and it all creates quite a complex mesh of different components that operate together to form the functionality of your company. So we need to create a model to try and understand how things hang together, so that we can start to visualize or analyze how it is working at the moment, and how well or how poorly it might be working in some areas, and what we can do about to resolve that. So the first thing that we do coming into the tool is we need to create a model of the organization. So as John mentioned, look, we can start from a standard library where we can provide lots of different frameworks. So we can use Archimate if you wanted to go down to the solution level, or BPMN, or we can go into entity relationship diagrams, Cardno, iTool, Zachman, UML, TOGAF, you name it. We can generally support it, and if we don't, we can actually build it very quickly, because the tool is a very flexible tool in terms of creating a model of the organization. Now, one of the ones that we typically use, or most of our customers use, is a hybrid meta model. So if you have a look at this model at the moment, it has quite a lot of components on there, but it is pretty much TOGAF based. So we have the familiar areas of the infrastructure, information, applications, and we get up into the business parts and the people side. We have extended it in some areas. So for example, in the information architecture, we've extended the TOGAF meta model to provide a little bit more detail in the data areas, and we can add different components in. We have support for different types of services, so infrastructure and platform services, as well as the business services. And the support for that is actually probably a better model than actually standard TOGAF, which is now 9.2, which still is a little bit clunky in the way that it supports services. But it's quite easy to extend the model to adapt to different stakeholders' needs. So if we go up the stack further, we can see the business services there that we were talking about. But we've also been able to bring in more information. So we could bring in information from BPMN, for example. We can bring in capability type information, and we can bring those in from APQC, or we could do that at the process level. And going at the very top, we were able to bring in the business motivation model from the object management group. Because most of our customers, or most companies sort of tend to use that model. We can also bring in projects and ideas that are compliant with Prince or PF. We've brought some different things in. So with all of this, we're able to have quite a rich model that is used by most of our customers. But having said that, you don't need to start with something quite so complex. For a lot of our customers, we can start with a subset of that, and we could start with starting with processes, applications, servers, and maybe having some properties for finance and things like that. We could actually start to build some value out of even a simple model like that. So what we advocate is an iterative approach, where we start with an initial set of problems, and we'll start to model that, and we will extend the model as we go along and as we need. So we can start off with something very simple. We can then start to add services in it at a later time, and we might get up to, say, within a 12-month period where we'll start to flesh out more of the components. So a lot of our customers use this model because it is a very flexible model in terms of it allows them to answer a lot of questions, and there are some artifacts that are available out of the box to support this. And if we do need to make changes, and as I said, I work with customers implementing this, and typically most customers would tweak this model because there are changes or components in their model which are different for their company. So what we don't do is that we don't say, this is our meta model, you must use it. What we do is we say this is a reference meta model, which is hopefully pretty close to what you need, but by all means go and change the model. And it's very easy to go into the model, add new components, add new connections, and add properties, which is the data on the model. Now, our model is based on a graph database. So a graph database is similar to what you'd find at places like Facebook, where you're dealing with massive amounts of data and where you're needing to change the structure of the data in a flexible manner. So instead of having an old SQL database where you need to load tables and put foreign keys in to link to other tables, with a graph database, when you implement an object or you instantiate an object, you create links at the time of that creation. So the connections are always in the model. What that means is two things. One is that the connections are a first-class citizen of the database, and that means that you can add properties to your connections, and that is important in places like where you have application interfaces. So you want to know more than the fact that application A talks to application B. You might need to know also that, well, there's actually half a dozen interfaces between application A and application B, but some use different protocols. Some might use FTP, some might use HTTP, but all of the interfaces are different. And in a graph database, you're able to model that. The other big difference with the graph database is the flexibility to actually get through and navigate your database. You don't need to know, where or you don't need to structure your query before you start, like you might need to set up in a SQL database. You're able to traverse the connections between the components and do things in types of queries in a graph database that are extremely difficult to do in a SQL database. And that's why companies like Facebook and that are able to do analysis on large volumes of data and be able to explore links between different people to see that your second cousin also likes the same music as you do type of queries. So in terms of the model, we have different we support different architectures. So when we come in to the model, we can set up, typically we'd set up a current state architecture. We might set up a target state architecture, and we can create any number of different architectures to do analysis. So why this is important is that if you're moving from a current state to a target state, and say you have a large project that is going to implement change, then it's not just a simple matter of replacing, a single application. Quite often, if you change an application, you're changing the platform services or the system software that it runs on. You're changing the connections to servers that are hosting it. You're changing the processes that are using that applications and the capabilities that are supporting it. So everything is tied together in this mesh of different components. So in order to make changes or to understand the changes, you can create a different architecture so that you can essentially rip and replace parts of your system and then be able to compare them to a to a target state. And that way you can start to understand sort of how why one particular approach is better to another one. And we'll get to that in a little bit later. So in terms of I'll go through very quickly some of the main type of artifacts in the tool. So within the architecture, we're going to have different types of, these are the instances of the different types of things. So for example, under applications, we're going to have all of the applications that are owned by this particular organization. So we use the viewpoints. So we use catalogs, matrices, diagrams, and charts, and we'll see other visualizations when we get to our enterprise tool. So if we start simply with a catalog, and if we have a look at the, say, the applications. So this provides a list of all of the applications within this model. So you might see here at the moment that, so these are the properties, or you might think of them as data fields that we have. And we have different types of data fields. So we can have links to external URLs. So we could, if I clicked on that, I could go to abc.com. I can have heat mapped type information on different components. So for example, if I went to this column and I can change the color depending on a value and say, well, business is going to be yellow and support is going to be brown, and I'll do a red for desktop. So once I've done that, everything is automatically changed. So one thing that is important within the model is that these are all active components. They're not a spreadsheet as such that's pulled out of the model. So if I make any changes here, so if I change this version to version 4, then that is updated in the model. So if I change this type from a business to a support application, then the heap mapping will change, but also any other places where that information is used will also be updated. So if I had a chart of the number of applications by type, that chart would be automatically updated. I'm also able to link the connections to other components. So I can link here the departments that own it, and I can also show some information about the connected components. So if I have a look for these applications, I can show which platform services they're connected to. And platform services are the system types of applications. So the operating systems, DBMSs, etc., that support a business application. And we can annotate these and show different information, so we can see for the, say, Abacus, for example. No, say for the CRM. The CRM, we can see that it's using Microsoft IIS, SQL Server, and Windows platforms. I can also see the heap mapping of those of the lifecycle recommendations. So I can see that these are retain, invest, and this one is refresh, migrate, and I can see some information about the lifecycle dates for that. So we're able to add lots of information and connect things up. So if I wanted to add this to a new server, I could just go to the tool here and say, just connect this up to another server, and it's there. So that's where you're able to add and connect things. It's one way of doing that. Now with this information, I can sync this information with, ServiceNow or SharePoint, so that the information can come in or be mastered from another source, or we may choose that that Abacus is the master and can send information out to SharePoint lists, etc. We're also able to export information to Excel. So if I exported these applications all out to Excel, it will create a spreadsheet which will retain the same heat mapping, and we're able to actually add information to this, and I could say put in a new application here, and I'll just copy that down there, and so I'll just call that my new app, because I'm very creative with my naming. And if I just save that, and if I then imported that from Excel, it will. Okay, so I've got the other one still open. So okay, I'll just go back to there. So I'll just close that. I'll go back here. All right, so if I just import that again, and what it will do is that it will create a new component for me, because it realizes that I added something to that list, and it's now imported that into the model. So what I can do with these is that I can do sorting, filtering on any of these. So I can sort by different types, same as you can within Excel. I can import the data, I can change the data, so we're able to get data into the model very easily. So getting data in, we can bring it in via Excel, which is a very powerful way of getting data in, but we can do it from ServiceNow, we can do it from SharePoint lists, we can bring it in from Visio, we can bring it in from different APIs. So we have an open source, open sort of environments with Abacus, so it's very easy to get data in, which is important when you're building your models, because you need to try and get the data in so you can start to analyze it. So in terms of, once we get the data in, we can start to do some basic analysis on that. So there are different types of catalogs and connections that we can also use, and diagrams. So for example, we can come into our we could come into our application costs, for example, and we could see for a particular components how the costs are going to be attributed through the model. And how this is done is by some of the inbuilt algorithms. So we have a financial complexity, performance and reliability simulators, which are already built into the tool. And these will do quite complex calculations on the model. And in this case, it is taking the cost of these components, attributing those to a server above it, which again is attributed to the components that are using that. And eventually it is flowing through either to a project or to a business unit that is ultimately consuming that. And the way that we do that is that we can use the CapEx and OpEx costs. We can amortize that over a period of time, and we can calculate sort of total costs for a number of years, and we can attribute those costs using different rules to different components that use them. In addition to that, we also have a number of algorithms that we can already use. So, and we have a visual algorithm composer that will allow you to create your own algorithms, so that, for example, we might look at some of the calculations. So I'll just cancel that because it's going to run that. What we can do is that we can create algorithms ourselves. So if you have different types of calculations that you want to do, or attribute values throughout the model, then you're able to do that. And some of our customers are doing that because they have different KPIs, for example, that they're interested in, and they want to total those and play around with those KPIs and sort of attribute those to different parts of the model. So, so we can do, application costs. We can do things like the costs over a using different visualizations. So with the model, we can render the information any. So was there a question there, or?
Yeah, sorry, Peter. Yeah,
Yes.
just a quick question. With the application costs, can you, with the integrations that you've got, I think you mentioned ServiceNow, SharePoint, and I saw one other Technopedia or something there.
Yeah.
We just, for example, we have Snow as our sort of server asset management and PC management tool. Is that something you can integrate into to bring across server and PC data?
You should be able to. I'm not familiar with Snow, but if it's got an API, we can AppWorks to do some code to get the data into Abacus, or if they can get it into if it can get it out of Snow in either XML or Excel or any other data format, we can suck it into Abacus. So Abacus has an open API. We publish our API, so some customers choose to tinker around with that ourselves. We have a RESTful API as well, for which will allow updating or pulling out of data from Abacus. So generally, when it comes to other systems, the answer really depends on the application that you're trying to pull out data from, how open those applications are and whether we can get the data out, because certainly if we can get it out of the other application, we can certainly get it into Abacus.
That sounds good. And yeah, that's fantastic around the APIs. Just other question, just while talking on costs.
Yeah.
For licenses, let's say we have a system that, we have 5,000 licenses or something. Can that be recorded in the system, and does that roll up into this cost?
Sure. Yeah, so what we do is that, so you might have the, I've done that a number of ways with some customers. So normally what you would do would be you would attach a license cost would be an OPEX cost for a particular component. So you might have if it's an application, so the license cost is the OPEX cost. If it's anything else that they're providing, it's typically an OPEX cost. Sometimes that might be covered by a particular service contract. So I have some customers who say, well, I've got a service provider who's providing me all of these costs. We don't know the breakdown, but we know that we're spending, so many hundred thousands to cover all of these different components. And we can set that up as well. And some customers I've set up having, multiple suppliers that have multiple contracts and multiple service agreements, and we're able to manage and see the cost of how much we're spending with different suppliers, and also when the contracts are coming up for renewal and what are they covering, so that we can also some customers can start to manage some of the vendors and some of the contracts.
Okay, and just I guess with how our business likes to look at different things from multiple viewpoints, assuming, yep. Let's just say we, and this is possible in the system, to potentially look at this in a matrix style format to say, well, I want to break down these licensing costs per country or per organization, so per location and yep. or per organization and or another sort of bit of data.
Yes.
Assuming that's possible.
Yeah, because what you do, if we get back to the meta model, so if we have and that's one of the things that we look at is when we're setting up the model is, are we able to answer the questions that you have? So if we set up an application here, for example, which has a an OPEX cost on it. We can see that we've got a connection through to the suppliers, so we can view it from the supplier viewpoint. We can see it from maybe from an owns, or we can from a department. We can see the business services or the processes or the capabilities that are consuming that application. So we can, or we can see it from the projects that might be impacting on a particular application. So we can view it from different perspectives, and that's the beauty of having a rich model, is that you're able to set up the connections so that you can actually query through the model. And some of these connections also do not necessarily need to be a direct connection. So, for example, I could come through and see for an application how I could see for an organization what applications are they using to support a capability, for example, and I could sort of allocate costs along that way as well, and say, well, how much is each capability costing for applications? So you're able to do complex querying on your model, and that's the difference between having a modeling tool as opposed to a diagramming tool, which some other tools are stronger in the or purely a diagramming tool, and you can't do sort of complex sort of questions or queries on that. So in terms of the information that we can provide, we have here lots of different diagrams. We can I'll show you a few more. So we can do things like sort of enterprise sort of roadmaps showing how we're going to get from different where we are to a current state. We can show sort of project impacts. We can show business capability maps. Each of this information is all we're able to drill down on these. And so, for example, if I click on that, it will take me down to a business process view, which is underneath that. Within the applications, we can look at the applications interfaces, and again, this is an example where we're showing on the interfaces the properties of the connection, so we can show the methods, protocols that they're using for interfaces. We've seen the application costs. We can do simple heap mapping of applications. If we can heat map on any property that we like. And actually, when we get into the enterprise later on, which is more of the visualization, this is where we'll start to see some of the how you can represent this information to your stakeholders. Other types of things that we can do is that we can provide impact and help with impact analysis. So we could automatically create some diagrams. So these are diagrams that are showing for a particular department what applications they're using and what the current status of the application is. We can also show the same thing from an application viewpoint. So again, it's changing the orientation of how you're going to query the model to provide different views for different stakeholders. So for example, if we look at the CRM application, which is here, we can see that these are the platform services. So I'll just enlarge that a bit for you. So it's using SQL database, IIS web server, and Windows platforms running on these servers in these data centers, and supporting these services, supporting these capabilities, which run in these different departments within the countries and supporting projects. So we're able to provide sort of a detailed sort of view and automatically create sort of different views of the model. So the other thing that we can do is with the model, we can query the model quite easily. So if I inserted a new diagram, and if I went down to a viewpoint, so this describes sort of what type of components that we're going to use, and reproduction is right. So, okay, I'll just, okay, just. So this is a, a simple diagram, and I could go into the components, and I might sort of pull out here for Australia all of the front end processing applications. So it's asking me that I've pulled out at a group level, so it's asking me whether I want the components beneath that, which I could either choose to say yes, or I could bring that out again and say, I'll just delete that from the diagram at the moment, and I'll pull that out, and this time I'll say yes, give me all of the components underneath it. So with each of these components, so if I want to have a look at how Abacus is actually used, I can quickly create a drill down diagram. So I could, so this will give me 1 degree of separation of Abacus. So from that, I can see that it uses 2 databases, uses some platform services. It's used by strategy and operation, and these are the services that it's currently attached to. I can create different attachments here, so I could pull that out and say, well, let's say use a new platform service. So I'll just give it a new service name there, or I can attach it to an existing service as well. So when I do that, that's actually creating those connections in the model. So any other places like the catalog that we saw before that had all of the application connections, that would be updated immediately to show that change. So this diagram's given me 1 degree of separation, and I can go to any of these components and say, well, for this database here, let me see where else it's used. So I can see it's used in a catalog of databases. It's used in some charts there, so database summaries. So I can query on that, or I can show it in the Explorer. Or the other thing that I can do is I can query the model. So if I started off, for example, and said I wanted to have a look at my model. I'll just clear some of these filters. And I'll just do that again. Open element selection. Right, so element selection, right. Okay, so if I came in on a particular server, for example, and what I can do is that I can tell it to query the model. So what it would be similar to would be starting at the bottom of your model and saying, for this server, show me what's attached to it, and I can see that there's an impacted by or is hosted at. And I can say, if I clicked on that, I could see that there's applications and platform services hosted on that. So I could say, give me the applications, and then I can see, well, for the applications that are hosted on that, who owns those, and which would be a department that owns it, and who uses it, which would be a process. So I'm able to then go through and actually start with this server and see that there's a number of applications that are using it, and this one is used by the customer service for evaluating customer service operations. This one's using by the ERP and owned by human resources, and this one's used by marketing to develop their marketing plans. So if I had to make changes to this server, I'd know who I would need to contact. And I can continue with this and start to, so essentially what I've done is I can go into the model, and if I just looked at the meta model diagram here, what I've done is that I've gone from my server here, and I've said, well, what is hosted at it, which is this application. From here, I've branched to say, I want to see who owns it, and I want to see the processes that use it. I could continue on with the processes and show, what capabilities and go up to the what strategic objectives are they supporting. So you're able to use that tool to move around your model and do specific queries and analysis and what-if analysis on your model. So you can start at any point. So if you're looking at, for an application, what would happen if I pulled this application out and replaced it? What does it currently do? What is it connected to in the realm of things? So the other thing that so we're able to do quite detailed analysis. We're able to do multiple architectures. I'll just show you that very quickly. So with the architectures, I'm able to create different descendant architectures here. So I could actually show a path of how we're going to get to a target state. So each of these architectures is derived from the one above, but in each time the components connections are all going to be different. And what I can do is that I can actually compare an architecture. So if I went into this architecture here, say my application landscape, if I went into Australia and said I wanted to have a look at the application interfaces, and if I decided that I wanted to change all these database servers and I wanted to delete those, so I can delete them from this architecture. When I delete that, it's telling me that it's used in all these other places. Do I really want to get rid of it? I say yes, right, and I can delete that one as well. And what I could do is that I might change that to a to a database service, for example. So if I just maybe if I deleted that. So I deleted that from the architecture. So once I've deleted that, if I had OPEX and CAPEX costs related to that component, then the cost of this architecture would be different. So if I put a new service in here, which is my new Super DB, and I connected up these other components here, so I'm attaching that. I'm attaching that one to replace the connection. So essentially what I've done is that I've replaced a component. You can see here with this plus sign here that it's recognizing that I can compare this architecture right with another architecture. So I could say compare this to, we're in Horizon 2 at the moment, compare it to the production architecture, and it will show that there are differences between the architectures. So this has been changed. This has been added, so I can see visually what is changed there. If I went in and had a look at the catalogs for the databases, I would see that there would be differences between the between those architectures and the components. And what I can do is that there may be KPIs for different architecture. So what I could actually do is I could show how I might sort of get to a target, or how I might actually I'll do a line diagram to show how I might get to a target state, for example. So if I just inserted a chart here, and if I just did a line. And if I said that I wanted to do, I'll go back there. So if I have a look at the production and a couple of architectures, and I just said I wanted to have a look at some of the KPIs. So the right, what I can do there is that I can see that from the production as is that these are how the the KPIs are going to vary over time. So, for example, if I had a look at the performance there, that the performance is going to improve over a number of years, but it's not going to be a straight line from current state to target state. It's going to increase in the first time horizon, then it will plateau, and then may increase. And that's where we can start to do complex analysis of different architectures to show not only why a target state is going to be better, but we can show how are we going to get there by having a number of transitional architectures. So, so what I'll show you now is, because I've shown you how to analyze and how to understand the architectures, but the main thing that we have now is our enterprise tool, where we can actually show a lot of this information for different stakeholders. So with what I've been talking about so far has been in the studio. The studio is where we create our models, how we create the different architectures, where we do our analysis, where we create different visualizations, and then we can present this information to a different group of stakeholders via our enterprise tool. So with the enterprise tool, we have different types of users. We have some users who are able to edit data, and others, any number of people who can just come in and consume the information. So we can set up dashboards for different stakeholders. I'll just need to refresh this because I've had it open for quite a while. So once we come in, we have dashboards for different types of users, and we can tailor those to the users. So if they come through Active Directory, for example, we could say, well, for this user, that's the only dashboard that they might see might be the application costs, for example. So we could show sort of the costs of different pie charts. We could come in and we could show the applications, and we could show the things like the application interface diagram. So this was a diagram that we saw before I ripped it apart. And we're able to pull information out of the model. We also have for tree maps, so we can come through different organizations. We can change the size of the components based on a property, so it might be via the cost of the application, and the coloring could be the current view of this application. So if I hovered over that, we could see the life cycle recommendation for that is to retire or eliminate, which is why it is red, and it's got a total cost of ownership probably over 5 years of $500,000. And we can drill down through the model, or we can actually click on that and we can start to see a Sankey diagram, so showing what it's connected to, so what is coming in. So it's attached to a department and it's attached to a process coming in, and on the outgoing connections to a server and to another application that it interfaces to. We can also come down and we can see all of the properties. So these are all of the cost properties of that component. So we can see the total cost, $500,000. So that's calculated over a 5-year cost. We can see sort of attributed cost of what's coming in from components beneath it, and what are the local costs. The life cycle, so any properties that we want to connect or capture about that application, we can show that there, and we can also show sort of different types of other diagrams that one's not used any diagram on different matrices that, for example, that it might be using. So we could see for applications hosted at servers. So this is going to the model again and pulling out an existing matrix that is available. So okay, so it's taking a little bit of time, which I might just close on that. All right. I might bail out of that because it's using a sample model, and I'm not actually I haven't used that actual connection there before, so I'm not sure how well that is set up. But we can look at things like projects, so we can see catalogs of different projects. We can do a whole range of different charts. Now, with this information here, is, as I mentioned, is that for certain users, we can edit those in the cloud or in our enterprise, so that will actually go back and update the model. So that means that a lot of users will be able to come in and look at the data, and some of them may be able to change data without them having to need to go into Abacus, or in fact even know anything about Abacus. So for example, you might have application owners. So you might say, I don't want them to go anywhere near my models where I'm connecting anything, but if they want to go through and connect or change some of the data, so life cycle data or costs or anything like that, and that is whatever's governed by permissions as well, then they can go through and make those changes. So the idea with that as well is, as well as having API interfaces into the tool, we're able to have the data available in HTML5 like this on a website where different people can actually update the data. And what you might do is that you might create a catalog, for example, and you could make that available to a particular person and say, can you please complete this data? And a lot of customers now start to do that, so that the architecture team is not bogged down in maintaining the data in the model. They can get the users who are the owners of that data to actually update it themselves. And with the browser as well, we can actually go through and have a look at different components within the model. So we can go through into production as is, and we could look at different types of catalogs and matrices. This one is an interesting one, which is used by a lot of customers, and this is really demonstrating the power of a graph database. What it is doing is that it's coming along for each project and looking at all of the things that are impacted by the project, and then looking for each of those components, what other projects are impacting on the same components. So for along the diagonal here, you have the intersection of the project with itself, essentially. So this provides that the single customer view is impacting on this department, these two servers, these applications, this capability in this location. But it can also see for those same components that the ERP tech refresh and financial decommissioning are impacting on Sydney, but the cybersecurity project is also impacting on 4 of the same components. When we get down to the ERP tech refresh, we can see that there's a lot of similarity between the cybersecurity and the ERP tech refresh. So we can start to look then to see that there's interdependencies between those projects. So you might be able to collaborate, but certainly if there's a delay in this project, then there's likely to be a flow-on delay in that. And that's part of the things that you need to start to look at with the complex projects, so that you can keep a track of your whole portfolio. So with these diagrams, for example, we can start to filter on these. So for example, if I went into this my technology, and if I clicked on the web, for example, so you can see I've got all of these other graphs available at the moment. But if I click on this one, my demo one's a little bit slower than our prod. It's a lot slower than prod. So now you can see that I've got a filtering of the information type web, and you can see that these other charts have also been filtered to reflect that view. So what you're able to do is that you're able to create a dashboard for your stakeholders and provide different types of visualizations that they are interested in, but then also be able to allow them to start to filter the information to get a more in-depth understanding of the information beneath that. And I can just remove that. So there's a whole range of different visualizations that we can use. So we can do tree. I'll just show you some of them. So we can do pie charts, line charts, bubble charts, tree maps, sunburst, hierarchical bar charts. We're also able to have some custom visualizations, which allow us to do other types of sort of chord diagrams, sunburst diagrams that we can set up. So, for example, we have a one that I was playing with this morning, which I hope is still there. So I can see here for application life cycles. So this is showing me for this application what the current dates for this. So it went into production in 2005 and is going to remain in production until 2035. But remember, we mentioned before that it required different platform services. So if I drill down on that, it's telling me that it requires a Windows platform. This came from a slightly different model than the one I was showing you before, so which is why the information is different. But what we're able to do is to drill down on components underneath that. I can take that down further and show what Abacus is connected to, or I can so I can show a Gantt chart of different components, but then go down beneath that. So in this example, if I just refresh that, okay. So what it's showing here is that the Abacus application is going to be there for a while, but the underlying components may not be there. So the underlying component had an end-of-life date of 2020, which means that after this date, the application may be unsupported. So we're able to do that at any different level. So we can create sort of different types of visualizations for different people. So we can show the views from different perspectives. So we can show for different projects the financials underneath that. So how that is operating within different countries underneath that project. So that is going down to a department level. We can show things like cat's cradle diagrams, which can show the connections between different components. So in this case, we're looking at the different applications. And what I might do, I'll just expand that so you can get a better look at that. So what I can do here is I have all of the applications, how they're connected with different platform services. And if I increase the tension, I can start to see that there are patterns evolving. So I can see that between the ERP, for example, that there's a pretty high dependence on the CRM and also the Unix. So I can start to get a better understanding of how things are connected together. So it's another way of sort of visualizing the data. So we can create these risks as long as we've got the model, we've got the components, we've got the connections, and we've got the properties. We can start to visualize that and query that, any way that we like. And if we don't have the components or the connections that we need, and quite often that happens that a new requirement comes in, we just simply go into the model and we can create that component and connection, add the data that we need, and we can start to use that. We don't have to rebuild the whole model to do that. We can just essentially add things on the fly. That is limited to designers, of course, because you don't want everybody coming in making changes to your model. But you're able to adapt, very easily to changes in the organisation. So you understand sort of what questions that you have today, but you don't know in 2 years' time sort of what questions you're going to be asked. So you need the flexibility to be able to adapt your model in the future to be able to support that. So, okay, so look, I've covered a whole lot of things here at the moment. There's a lot of stuff I haven't shown you, but in the essence of time, I was wondering if there's any particular questions or queries that you have that I could use the time as more of a Q&A for you, rather than me sort of prattling on about the tool.
Thanks, Peter. No, that was really good. Good depth. Thank you. I had a quick question. Where is data stored? Is it cloud-based or on-prem, or how is that?
Where is what stored?
Sorry, where is the data stored?
Okay, the data is stored in the cloud. So what we do is we have a central repository, and so there is and the repository is covered by SVN, Subversion. So what you do is that even if you're in the cloud, you check out a local version of the model, because if you're making changes to, if you wanted to make changes to an application, for example, you can't lock the whole model, because the application's connected to processes, it's connected to databases, platform services, business units. So you can't lock the whole model just because you want to change a component. So what it allows you to do is to check out a copy of the model where you can make your changes, and then you commit those changes back to the central repository. And with the subversion control, it checks for conflicts. So say, for example, that you checked out an application, you wanted to delete it and recreate it, and in the meantime, another architect has checked out the same component and renamed it and checked and committed it back. What would happen is that it would recognize that there is a conflict between what you are trying to do and what someone else has done, and will bring up a conflict resolution for you to resolve that. And with the subversion as well, it gives you full audit track of what has been done, and it does provide you the capability, if you ever needed to roll back commits.
I was just going to say, Peter, and this is John speaking, Sam. So Abacus Cloud is stored on, or it's hosted by AWS. So a multi-tenanted server is within Sydney, so that's where most of our APAC clients sit. Although if you wanted to get a dedicated server like one of our larger clients, Suncorp, then you could set one up locally. As far as speed and is concerned, there's not too much of a difference, to be honest, although there is advantages in having your own dedicated server. For example, you can be upgraded at different times than everyone else sitting on the APAC server. So if the question was whether we're backed by Azure or AWS or that sort of thing, the cloud solution is backed by AWS, and as a point of differentiation, I know that other vendors sometimes charge the client for hosting fees to be on Azure, or for example, Avolution doesn't pass. Well, Avolution only requires a subscription cost, and then there's no other hidden fees. It's just the subscription cost plus GST, and that's it. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
No worries.
Okay.
And we also allow hybrid options as well. I should have mentioned that. Anyway.
A hybrid model.
Yep. Yeah. So if there is a preference for keeping your data on-prem, so I mean, there's three major options. So you can have your data on-prem, and then it would be a perpetual license sale, and you'd pay support and maintenance each year in order to access support lines and have upgrades every so often. There's the hybrid model where you may be able to, or you may want to have some of your users on-prem and some of your users in the cloud. And then lastly, there's the fully hosted or the SaaS option, where you would log in via your web browser with the username and password.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thanks. So next question was around gathering data for the model. Do you have the capability to send out like a user survey to different experts within the business so they can come in and edit their particular area of the model?
What you could do is you could do that two ways. You could either create a catalog in Excel, or if you're using the enterprise tool, would be to make that catalog available to them if they had the update availability, and then they could go through and they could complete that data. So yes. Okay, so what you could do is, I've been showing you these combined sort of catalogs here. So if I added a new portlet, for example, so if I went in admin and said, look, give me a new dashboard name, and I'll just call it data entry. Right, and what I could do then, I'd just add a portlet and say, give me a catalog, and from my production as is, it might be an application simple, right? And on that, I could refine that as to what properties I actually want to show. But I could take that URL and I could send that to someone and say, here's your here's the dashboard for you. Can you come in and complete all of this data, because some of it is blank or some of it is missing, and it's if you're data owner of that, you can look after that. Or alternatively, as I showed before, I could export it as an Excel and say, send it to someone and say, well, can you update it and then send it back to me, and I'll load it back into the model. I think this method here would be easier to do, or we could even do it via the browser, which is the view of the model, and just say for a particular catalog. Again, I could just get the URL of a catalog and say, send it out to someone and say, just link into there and just start typing away.
Awesome. That's really nice and clean.
Yeah, that's much better way of doing it, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to avoid the enterprise architecture team having to do a lot of the maintenance. So where you've got data owners and application owners, you stick different catalogs out to them, you give them the permissions and say, this is your data. The questions that you want to answer are dependent upon the data that you put into this tool. So if you want good data, go in there and clean that up.
Brilliant. Okay. Just one moment, sorry. I think you've covered off most of everything. I know, just for the record, Paul is probably watching the recording. He's probably screaming, asking me to ask a certain question I've missed.
Yeah, okay.
Any other thoughts?
Just in terms of this being an enterprise architecture tool, does it also sort of offer some other features, such as what BPM tools and other similar tools offer as well. Is there anything that we can get in here to provide some of that capability back to the business, or are we just contemplating?
Sure. No, so what? Okay, so at the moment we've loaded one model, right? And we used a model there which was for the enterprise tool, but you're not limited to the number of different libraries or projects that which is what we call the collection of architectures. So I could come in here and say, go to a standard library and say, okay, I've got my enterprise architecture stuff, but some guys want to go down in to do heavy BPMN. So I could create a separate library for them, and they could go through and do that. So that way, if you want to start segmenting your architectures, you can have your enterprise architecture use a particular model, but underneath that, if you wanted to segment so that the process guys want to use BPMN, the application guys want to use Archimate or want to use UML or SysML, then you can set up different libraries for them so that they can go down into detailed analysis of that. Now, when you do that, you can do it two ways. You could say what I showed you before is a hybrid model where we brought in the high-level BPMN components, for example. I could bring in all of the BPMN components so that I've got one massive model or larger model which allows you to do detailed BPMN plus the Abacus enterprise architecture level. Or you could keep it separate. And generally, that depends on whether the information at the detailed level is going to be interest to other areas. So, for example, if I went down to a level 5 process, is that going to be of interest to anybody else outside of the business process team? If the answer is no, then often you'd say, well, okay, let's keep that in a separate repository where it's, they can just have their own space to do detailed things. The other thing is that all of the analysis and stuff still remains the same. And we can do things like one of the algorithms there is to look at the performance. So where you can look at detailed throughput of and analyze processes so that you can see, what would happen for a process if I threw more resources at a particular step. So you are able to have the ability to use the tool for multiple types of projects and libraries, not just one.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Is there anything else? Okay, I think that's all we had for the moment.
All right, okay.
Okay, so I think as next steps, we will send through a follow-up, obviously a link of the recording as well as some of the demo slides and something which we could set up as well as evaluation licenses. So I'm not sure whether you've tried the 30-day trial at this stage or whether you're interested in the Abacus Cloud trial, or maybe it's a thing of after you've had a chance to digest this, then you might want to come back and ask us about trying it out.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep. Okay. No problem. Well, I'll leave some information in the email, or Jody might follow up there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I think both Paul and Sam have tried Abacus.
Okay.
Paul is on cloud. I think Sam, you have the desktop version. Is that correct?
Great. Okay.
Yeah, I've logged in a couple of times. I can't say I've used it a lot, but yeah, we'll definitely be diving in.
Well, that's all right. Well, there's plenty of webinars which we have about best practice road mapping, plenty of interesting white papers. The case studies are more anecdotal stuff, so if you need to kind of create a business case and show the value to the wider organisation. That's more what the case studies are for. But there are a lot of good resources which we have. So yeah, feel welcome to ask any questions as required, and we're happy to help.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Yep.
That was really
Thanks for joining us today, Sam and your team. And yeah, feel free to contact me or John if you have any questions, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can with them.
awesome. All right, have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
everyone. Thanks, Peter. Yep.